Hi, welcome to episode 43, I believe, of Startups Right. Today, my guest is Valeriya Shunina. I'm really thrilled to be joined by her. She's an investor at Earlybird Venture Capital. While has a very interdisciplinary background, she earned a master's in neuroscience. You helped run clinical trial and also raise capital at the biotech startup. To had a bit of a founder journey of yourself through the entrepreneurs first, and now you're part of the investment team at one of the Europe's leading VC firms, helping back the next generation of health and deep tech founders. I guess before we start with all the questions, things, I'd like to ask you more about your own background in your own words, and also what initially drew you to the world of biotech and venture capital.
I think you summed up my background very well, to be honest. I think one correction I would make is I am on investment team at Earlybird Health, not Earlybird, because we're two separate entities. But what brought me to venture capital is actually serendipity. I wish I could say it was my destiny from day one, but it's not. Like most things, it was kind of more trial and error. I studied life science purely because I was fascinated in it. And then I didn't want to go down the academic route. So instead, I wanted something a bit more dynamic than being in the lab. I didn't love it. So I went and did a short gig in a tech startup. It was a logistics tech startup. So it really had not so much to do with biotech. But it was super cool. I fell in love with the startup environment, and this is when the first time I properly learned about venture. And I left it after COVID and then did a short gig in leadership development and consulting, which is handy. And after that, I just wanted to combine the startup energy with the biotech, or startup energy with life science, actually. And biotech became kind of the most natural place to go. So I spent a few years at Grey Wolf, which was incredible. Really loved working in a biotech environment. The team was super close. I worked very closely with the CEO, Pete Joyce, and he was an amazing mentor and it was great, But then I got the opportunity to do EF, and at that point, we've kind of set up a clinical trial at Grey Wolf, so it plateaued a little bit in terms of the level of excitement for me, because once the clinical trial is set up, you're just kind of waiting for it out. And then I thought I might take the opportunity, and Pete was very welcoming of me taking the leap. So spent some time exploring ideas at Entrepreneur First, and then didn't end up with taking a project forward after that, but took some time to travel, reflect, and then Earlybird opportunity just came up. And then from my first interview, I really liked the team. I liked the energy, the debate. It was very different from being in a startup, but I loved it. Took the leap, and then still love it to this day.
Very interesting background. And I guess before we talk about more venture specific stuff, you before you started your Earlybird career, you said you worked at Grey Wolf Therapeutics, and you worked both on the operational side, and also you did some fundraising, I believe, too. How did that dual exposure shape kind of your understanding of what makes a fundable, successful startup?
Yeah. I think as a clinical project manager, your job is basically to stay super focused on data readouts, when they're going to happen, how they align with value inflection points of the company, and whether the budget supports that. And you do in-depth risk assessments, and you understand the impact of delays. So that's super operational, but at the same time, that's what we look at as investors. We look at value drivers, risks, capital requirements, milestones, and what the company can realistically achieve. So that's very aligned in the general approach. And fundraising just showed to me how hard it can be. It was brutal. It was straight out of COVID. It was a really hard race, took way longer than expected. We got a lot of rejections. It was rough. So I think it just, like, to me, it shows how much capital injection can really untie the company's hands, and people are waiting to get going and get things done. And I see it through this lens now on the investment side.
Understand. And I'm guessing your investment experience now is also shaped a bit more personally through your founder stint at Entrepreneurs First. I feel like at the most, I mean, so obviously always exceptions and differences, but I feel like more and more you're seeing both operator people moving in the VC direction, VC people moving operator direction to get that dual experience to really assess companies better. How did your first-hand experience as a founder in residence at Entrepreneurs First change how you think about early stage founders?
So EF was it was such an interesting experience. It showed to me that firstly, founders come from every path of life, and there was so many incredible, inspiring people there, and they're not what you would imagine a classical founder to be, and EF right now is quite different from what I do, because it's more focused on tech, and they don't have that many therapeutics companies coming out. They do biotech as well, but they don't have that many therapeutics companies coming out of EF.
Tech bio mostly now.
Yeah, tech bio. They do have some biotech, but some industrial biotech. Yeah. So with tech, things feel a bit more chaotic. It's a bit more iterative, and there's a lot of this early discovery work that's very hectic and very rewarding. But this is different from therapeutics because you have to make some company defining decisions quite early on. So there is a bit less wiggle room. And then generally, I think in healthcare, you're operating with in a much more regulated and rigid environment. So there is this trade-off between the ability to pivot. You have much more outside of, not outside of healthcare, but in less regulated environments.
That's a very interesting point you touched upon. There was, I feel like, boom in biotech therapeutics kind of startups investment, especially with mRNA ones after COVID, because of the success of Moderna and stuff. But lately, I feel like there has been a shift in terms of like there's less therapeutics, more tech bio, more like computational. Are you noticing that kind of shift? When do you think it kind of happened?
I think there are a lot of tech bio companies. I think more traditional healthcare investors still want to see assets. So it's harder for us to fund a company that is purely a platform at this moment in time, and the value still comes from the assets. So yes, there is a lot of AI utilization in the drug discovery and development process, and there are more and more platforms coming out of it, and I'm super fascinated by that space. The value at the moment still lies in the asset.
The age-old question of platform versus the asset in biotech.
Yeah, exactly. Yeah.
Well, since we're already talking about investing, can you tell us more about your current role and about you do at Earlybird?
Yeah, we're a very small investment team, so I have to wear a lot of hats, which I really like. So besides the role in direct investments, which I think is more defined, I also get involved in a lot of fund building work. And I think coming from operational background, it kind of hits both parts for me. And I do really enjoy the feeling of building something and actively shaping how the fund will look in the future. And then the role evolves. Like when I joined, there were a few deals that we were closing. So it was very much hands-on, high pressure, very much deal focus. And now it's a little bit more step back, build knowledge, build expertise in specific areas, and do scoping to find the next big opportunities. So it changes.
Got it. So when you look at startups, you have scientific exposure, you worked in a startup, now you're an investor. there's so many things to consider. And obviously you have to look at everything and assess it fully. But how do you personally evaluate like scientific risk versus market risk when assessing like deep tech, health tech, biotech startups?
Yeah, I think you can never look at everything.
Fair.
I think you always have a few key questions, and you try to cover as much as possible. But it's just not possible to see everything. But at Earlybird, we like novel biology. So with novel biology, there is an increased science risk, and I need to be really convinced that the mechanism is solid and there's a really clearly defined mechanism preclinically, and that there is also a link to human disease. So whether that's wide association studies or survival, any data that will show strong evidence of linkage to human disease is comforting. I think you can never know, but causal biology gives some confidence, So that's more from the science risk. And then the other thing is indication. I think indication is critical. So with some diseases, it's really tough to run trials, and they may be too heterogeneous, or there will be too ambiguous endpoints to get a really clear readout, or they might take so long. So to mitigate the risk of it dragging out and running out of capital and getting a gray zone area, indication has to be selected really carefully and has to match the mechanism and biology. And then on the market side, it's really important that the company has the target product profile defined early on and is able to justify that this target product profile is going to fit into the treatment landscape. And sometimes it comes too late, but I like to see that thinking come in early, because then you design your programs more thoughtfully. Yeah.
I understand. You said you cannot look at everything, which is very much right. Also, you cannot consider everything and have like very rarely you will get a startup that has everything perfect, right? There's always going to be some trade-offs.
Yeah.
So do you give equal weighting? Because there's teams, there's markets, there's science, there's etc. Do you give equal weighting to all of them, or do you just it's kind of a gut intuition on which ones gets the priority, which ones not?
I think it's very much on a case-by-case basis. I think it depends what's critical for this specific company. Yeah, I don't think there is a blanket answer to that.
Fair. One of the things you mentions that sometimes target profiles come in a bit late, which is not really ideal. So I guess my question, like for science-based founders, what advice would you give on building investor-ready validation? Especially when revenue, product demo, or user growth is not there yet.
Yeah. So that was one thing. So think about the target product profile early and the market positioning. And I think the rest is just also so case by case. I think one important thing is not to build it, the classic startup spiel, not to build it in isolation. So I think especially more academic founders like to run experiments, and not to generalize, but I think the mindset in academia sometimes can be that they would like to run experiments and then once it's ready, show it to investors. Whereas actually it's so important to get out and talk to people, talk to investors, talk to key opinion leaders, clinicians, other founders. And I think the most successful, especially the most successful first-time founders, they have done that. And they've gone out and really engaged the community to know what exactly they need. And I think that would be the most important advice.
Fair enough. Well, I'm curious one thing though. You have science training, you have science background, so you're obviously very familiar with science in general. But usually, when a founder builds something, I mean, they've been in the space for such a long time. They like really understand it. It's very hard to know the science as well as they do, right? So when you're first exposed to the idea and you have to do the due diligence, look into the science, and it's completely areas that's very like outside of the scope of what you're used to, what you're exposed to. What's your approach to really delving deep and understanding it properly?
I think you can never understand it as well as people in it. So I will do as much background reading as I need to be able to ask relevant questions. So I will dive into it just enough for me to have enough understanding to really get at the crux of the questions that I need to ask. And then I would go and speak with people who know better. So I will go and speak with key opinion leaders in the space and get their judgments and try to get a broad range of people to talk to that might have diverging views on the matter. And then you're left with the whole gray area of information that you have to make sense of because then there's also conflicting opinions, but at least you're actually getting it from people who know what they're talking about, because otherwise I think it's inefficient to try to really get to that level of expertise. And I think it's impossible to try to get the level of expertise quickly.
Fair enough. And one quick follow-up to this, something you're mentioning all the interesting things. So new questions are popping up. You said, Earlybird, you are very interested in novel biology. And I feel like there's quite a bit of new interest in novel biology. I actually, like a few days ago, I saw this LinkedIn post and somebody was talking about like they need to move from like the validated targets to scientifically validated targets to like novel biology to, find new things. Why do you think there's such a shift in that direction now?
I think that's my personal view on this, because I think that you can make many interpretations of it. But I think one key one from the investment standpoint is because that's where pharma is buying. So it seems to be that the trend across pharma M&A is moving from low-hanging targets to more novel biology, and then there is more value in this. So, like, for example, the deal with Biotech and AstraZeneca recently, it got bought for $1 billion in biobucks, but with very early clinical data, and the value was in their novel biology platform, right? And I think because we're seeing this trend across the M&A markets, that's one of the key things for us. Yeah.
That's fair. Very good answer. Is there like a patient population or like an unmet need that you're personally passionate about?
Yeah. So I have recently run an analysis on HFpEF, heart failure with preserved ejection fraction. And I've looked at the clinical pipeline of it, and cardiology appeared to be way more interesting than I thought it was going to be, because it's not really purely about the role of the heart, but it's very systemic. Like heart failure is a very systemic disease, so it affects a lot of adjacent pathways. And with heart failure with preserved ejection fraction, there is no treatment at the moment, and anything that worked for the other types of heart failure hasn't worked for HFpEF. So it's just interesting to understand, why and what the differences are, and how does the approach have to differ for it to work with this patient population. And it's 50% of the heart failure population, and there's massive unmet need with the aging population in general, and our lifestyle and increased obesity rates, heart failure becomes even more important.
Did you just was it something triggered, or were you just randomly searching for in cardiology and came across that specific indication?
We run the due diligence in that space.
Fair.
The thing that I looked at was comparing devices versus pharmacological treatments in heart failure with preserved ejection fraction. And that triggered me to look into it more, because I think it's fascinating.
It is fascinating. And I guess, there's some startups that are still in stealth and confidential, so you cannot talk about, but I'm curious what what startups or technologies you're most excited about right now?
I think I won't speak about specific ones. I will just talk broadly about the areas. So one is we already mentioned before. So we talked about AI and drug discovery. And the other one is in vivo CAR Ts. So with AI, I looked at I looked at a foundation model that does simulates protein folding and molecular affinity, and that triggered to look a little bit deeper into where can AI be applied, and how will it transform drug discovery and development. And we talked about the platform versus asset, and is it going to be the same with will there be pure platform plays that will carry enough value to make them good venture cases or not? Or will the business models change, and what are the value what parts of the drug discovery and development pipeline are ripe for innovation there, and does it have to be one specific part of the value chain, or does it have to be more of an end-to-end type of solution that covers multiple parts of the value chain? So I think there's a lot of unanswered questions in terms of how AI will transform drug discovery, and I think it's like the ongoing talk, and I want to keep a close eye on the space, because I don't want to be hype driven, and I want to really have a deep understanding of it. And then in vivo CAR Ts, so with CAR T technology, the whole notion is, and I'm sure you know, but just to kind of explain, the T cells, the killer cells, are taken out of the patient's body. They're genetically engineered to kill cancer cells, and then they're put back in the body, and then they can go and do their job and attack cancer cells. That's the premise. And it worked really well in clinic, but logistically, it's complicated and expensive, and not many hospitals can do that. So the market penetration has been tough, and the new wave of CAR T therapies is the in vivo technology, right? So the genetic engineering actually happens inside the body with gene delivery platforms like as a Biotech that I mentioned earlier, and I think that's fascinating technology. Again, it's super early, and there's not a lot there and not a lot in the clinic, but it's just I want to see how it develops, because I think it's very interesting, and I think it will capture this huge market that is currently not captured with CAR Ts, with the standard CAR Ts, because of the logistical complexities.
Fair. Something you mentioned about not really, following the hype, and I feel like VC, just like any other field, tends to be also hype driven, right? Like clean tech, AI, cryptocurrencies, blockchain, mRNA technologies when it was right after COVID. How do you stop yourself from? I mean, we're human. It's our psychology to kind of follow the consensus, right? Like, how do you manage to kind of take a step back out of the consensus and be like, no, I'm actually trying to formulate my own thinking?
Good question. I think it's just staying as educated on the topic, and really stepping back and thinking, what is it that I'm hearing people say, and why? I think it's more the discipline of thinking. Is it because it's so easy to fall into? And look, sometimes hype can be good, because sometimes that's where the transactions happen. And if the area is being hyped, and then there are a lot of transactions happening, it doesn't always have to be a bad thing, but because sometimes it can be incredible technology, but if the interest is not there, then or if you replace hype with interest, if the interest is not there, then it's not there. So yeah, I think really staying super informed, and also trying to distinguish, which is not always easy, where it's just interest and where it's hype that's going to die down fast.
Fair enough. One thing I remember somebody reached out to me from college, and that was a question I always had when I was doing my conversations. Everybody was telling you, especially earlier on, were like, yeah, it would be nice if you had like a PhD or MD if you wanted to,
Mm.
especially like in the therapeutic space, right? Um, what's your thought on that? Do you think it's necessary for people that are watching and interested in investing career? Do you think they should pursue like more advanced degrees, or do you think there are other ways to really accumulate the knowledge to be successful in venture career? I mean, I'm asking you because you didn't do PhD, and I'm not going to do PhD for sure. I don't want to be in the lab for 6, 7 years, so that's why I'm curious about your opinion as well.
I get asked that a lot, and I don't know.
Mm.
I think from my personal experience, I can say that I'm not, the industry is changing, and it's good to see that I don't feel like I'm looked down upon for not having a PhD. And but I do think that having had experience in a biotech that is on people's minds and is doing well at the moment also adds to adds to an image where maybe like when you have practical experience, then PhD becomes a little bit less relevant. But and I don't know what it's like to be in the business with a PhD, because of course with PhD you get really deep in one specific topic, whereas here you have to cover a lot of topics. But I do have to work a little bit harder than people that do have more science experience to understand scientific concepts. So I think I have to push on my strengths, and we do work together as a team. So there are people with stronger scientific experience, and then there are people with IP experience, and then there are people with legal experience. So there's, we try to make sure that we lean on each other and on each other's areas of expertise. But it does make it a little bit harder, but I think it's not like you can't do it if you're not curious, you just have to be curious and want to learn.
Very fair, very fair. I remember looking at the stats, and I think it said like quarter of the world's scientific publications comes out of Europe, but I feel like Europe still kind of lags behind in taking what's scientifically possible into what's commercially viable. Like that kind of like the pipeline from the lab to market is not as evolved as, let's say, in America, And I feel like it's just there are multiple factors, obviously, for that. But I'm just curious, somebody who lived in Europe, who invested in Europe, who has experience working with startups in Europe. Where do you see the biggest kind of gaps or untapped opportunities in translating European biotech science into venture-backed up companies?
Yeah. Yeah, it's a shame because Europe has great science, but a shortage. I think the main thing is shortage of risk capital to bridge that gap between academia and later stage investments. So in the US, you will have a new company funded with substantial capital. So then they have enough without having to go and raise smaller rounds to reach significant milestones. And then they can also run a few programs side by side. So it just makes it more streamlined. Whereas here, founders have to raise multiple rounds to get to that growth capital stage to reach those milestones. And even though at Earlybird we invest a bit later, and we don't tend to see the pre-seed, do pre-seed or pre-seed rounds, we do build relationships with academia and investors, and we want to build and align the community of earlier stage investors, later stage investors, strategics, and academia and spin-out projects, because I think the more aligned we are and the more startups understand what's required from them, and then strategics know what's going, just the more aligned the ecosystem is, the more streamlined the process will be. I don't think we will suddenly get the same type of capital, because the funds are smaller and we won't get the same type of big early rounds that they do in the US. But I think the best we can do is align the current players.
So more integrated kind of ecosystem. It's very connected.
Yeah, I think so. Yeah.
Got it. We are nearing towards the end of our episode, so I'm going to ask more reflection questions, because you're still wearing a lot of hats, and you've worn many hats before: researcher, operator, founder, investor. How do you stay curious and avoid burnout, in such a fast-paced, high-stakes environment?
Honestly, I didn't avoid it. I burned out. That's why I went traveling. And the biggest learning wasn't really about how much I do. I came to the conclusion that it's more about how I do it and the environment that I do it in. So I'm naturally prone to taking things super seriously. So instead of making it so serious, I try to take it more as a game. So I treat more work more like a game, and it's fun, and it doesn't have to be so serious. And I work really hard to zoom out and see the bigger picture. And then I realized that in the grand scheme of things that I'm really stressing about or that are bothering me a lot now, I'm not that deep. So a lot of the time, I think that helps, and helps put things in perspective and get joy from work rather than just strive for outcome. And then the other side of it is learning to listen to my body. So sometimes you got to know when to push through and when to step back. And I think stepping back can be hard because it can seem like a fail. At least to me, it can seem like a failure. But also, it's knowing that it's a marathon, not a you can't sprint it. So knowing when to step back is important for me.
Oh, that's actually a very deep answer. I appreciate it all. I guess I'm sure there have been things that motivated you and inspired you along the way. It can be a book, it could be a person, it could be an idea, podcast, whatever. Could you tell us anything that really inspired you and why?
Yeah. I met a a startup and a writer who has a blog. His name is Amir in Berlin. And this blog is called Pursuit. And he does it more for himself, but I think there is so much wisdom in it. And I always get excited about it every week. But the one thing that he wrote about recently stuck with me. And he said that the idea was that the most successful people don't fight their nature, they design their environment to amplify it. And I thought that was interesting for me because in the world that is now obsessed with self-development and self-improvement formulas and getting better, it's really tempting to copy how other people do it. And I love listening to podcasts where successful people are being interviewed and getting inspired. I want to do all of what they do. But in reality, I think the important thing is to really sit with it and ask yourself how it will fit into your life and whether it will fit into your life, and I think I think playing to your strength rather than trying to patch up your weaknesses is kind of the better way of doing it. And I think that's because the way that you can shape a VC role, you wear so many hats, you can do it so many different ways. And I try to apply this and finding a way that works for me rather than trying to copy someone else.
I feel like we need another episode of just philosophical conversations, Val, because I feel like you're making some amazing points right now. I guess my final question would be, what advice would you give to founders building in the space in Europe?
Stay strong. At the moment, the environment is really tough. Try to find alternative capital sources. It's just really hard to raise at the moment, and I know the pains because of what I lived through it in Grey Wolf. And stay strong.
Stay strong. Well, it's been very much a pleasure, really, genuinely. Appreciate all your points and answers. It's been, yeah, thank you, Val.
Thank you so much. It's been a pleasure to be here and have a chat with you.
Thank you.